This episode is so full of richness that I can't wait for you to hear it. In this episode, artist David Macomber shares his family history in the commercial fishing industry in Cape May, New Jersey, and his journey into fine art. We discuss the creative process by acknowledging the challenges of maintaining motivation and overcoming self-doubt, how spirituality plays into his daily life and his creative life, and the near-death experience that set David into a firm path as a professional artist. Let's dive in. Tama boots are the only fishing boots we recommend, and here's why. I came across Tama boots while walking out of the Pacific Marine Expo last year, and I didn't have plans to stop. I was exhausted after 3 days of PME, and if you know, it can be very overwhelming. Yet I was curious about a new boot on the market. I thought it was kind of bold. I'm like, okay, well, we have the brands that we know of fishing boots, but what are they all about? They didn't have a huge gimmick to draw people in like other booths, but rather stacks of boxes to try on and purchase on site. And I wondered, what could they offer that other famous brands did not? And it turns out a lot. For example, they are the only boot on the market that passes military testing, which is the highest testing you can get is glycerin on steel. The slipperiest, most dangerous contact that your boot can hit is glycerin on steel, which, very similar to fish guts, if I may, any kind of seafood residue. They don't call these boots grip tech for nothing. As a partner of a commercial fisherman, my top concern is safety. And this means that wearing these boots, that my fisherman has a better chance at safety on the water, which means I'm all in. Also, the side effect of these boots, which has been really cool, is that they last way longer than other boots that we've tried, and we've tried them all. Our deckhand busted a new pair of insert popular brand 2 weeks into crabbing in Oregon, and the glue fell apart, everything like that. And we immediately sent him a pair of Tama boots, and he hasn't looked back. And it's great because then you don't have to keep buying boots over and over again. It's totally worth the investment. They're about the same price as the other boots, and they last longer, which is amazing. And we've had fishermen from all fisheries test these boots on every slimy, slippery deck there is with rave reviews. And Tama's got the testimonials to prove it if you want to check them out. And, they don't just talk about wanting to be the best boots. They actually truly are. They're comfortable. Fishermen love how they nestle their heel. I could go on. I'm proud to say that Tama Grip Tech boots are the only boots that Partners of Commercial Fishermen community recommends because they are the only company that tests for the highest standards of safety and comfort. Pass this along to your fishermen. You can find them at the Pacific Marine Expo this year at booth 1166, or you can purchase the boots directly at www.tamaboots.com, which is TAHMABOOTS.com. And pro tip, if you wear Bama socks, just size up like you normally would. And if you see them at the booth, tell them that the Partners of Commercial Fishermen sent you. I'm Megan Waldrop, host of the Partners of Commercial Fishermen podcast, an extension of an online community for partners to connect and feel less alone. Our podcast invites fishermen, family, friends, and supporters of the industry to learn, laugh, vent, and hear stories about this incredibly unique way of life. What do you say? Let's dive in. Hi, David Macomber. We're so happy to have you today.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. To give a little background story, we connected via Instagram because Bree Dwyer, who is a member of our Partners of Commercial Fishermen community, had tagged me in one of your paintings, and it was actually a painting of my husband, and it was a picture that Bree had taken. We could follow all those dots. Yeah. And it just shows how freaking cool and beautiful this small world of commercial fishing is. And it turns out that not only is David an incredible artist, but he also grew up as a commercial fishing kid, and his childhood has really made an impact on his art and how he celebrates the ocean and working waterfronts and all the beautiful aspects of it. So we're super stoked to talk to you today. Thank you, David, again.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Awesome. So let's start from your commercial fishing experience. How was that as a kid, and what fishery and where were you located?
So I'm still located. I grew up in Cape May, New Jersey, and that's kind of born and bred and still live there today. So my grandfather ran a clam boat, and that was kind of out of Wildwood, New Jersey, Point Pleasant, New Jersey, and then also Virginia as well. And so the boat was kind of moved up and down the coast. But so my grandfather did that, and that was my mom's dad. And then my dad worked for him right out of high school. And that's how my mom and dad met. And then my dad just continued to work for him and then eventually went and ran his own boats. And so that was my life growing up until I was about 10 or 12 is when my dad left being a commercial fisherman and became, we have a ferry system that connects New Jersey and Delaware. And so my dad worked on the ferry and became a captain of the ferry. But still, my uncles and cousins are still commercial fishermen today and kind of continuing that family business.
It's so cool. And I really appreciated your note about what your dad did after fishing, that he became a ferry captain. My sister-in-law actually did that. She got out of fishing and she became a ferry captain. I'm always curious to see what kind of professions and careers that exist after fishing for those who love the sea. So that's really neat. So wondering, did you ever consider becoming a fisherman? Why or why not?
Yeah, of course I did. And I think, my grandfather did it and my dad did it, my cousins did it, my uncle did it. And it's like, that's just kind of where I thought that life would go. And my dad was really adamant, though, once I hit high school, of not trying to really talk me out of it. So it was just really him talking me out of it. And it was funny. I think it might have been like a junior in high school. And he got called to fill in captain on a boat. And he took me out for a 3-day trip. And it was probably everyone on the boat said it was the nastiest day they'd ever been out. And I feel like my dad was some sort of object lesson of him, like, I'm going to take you on the gnarliest day out and we're going to do this 3-day trip. And it was horrible. It was almost like he was like, see, I told you, you don't want this. So that was definitely wanted to do it. And then he was kind of leaning more towards me going to like Kings Point and trying to get, documented through there and then working on the ferry as well. And then I was going more towards art. So that's the kind of the path I took, was more artistic.
Amazing. Yeah. And that's what I want to talk about now is, what was your first inspiration to become an artist? Well, I want to know, when did you first realize that you had talent in that area? And then what was the moment that you decided, I'm going to actually pursue this? Because it definitely takes a lot of courage to be able to pursue creative careers. I mean, there's, blood, sweat, tears in a whole different way and very vulnerable.
Yeah, I think I'll try to give you the abridged, this is a 20-year journey, but I'll give you the abridged version. One thing that really helped is my dad's brother is a commercial artist. He's a watercolor painter down in North Carolina. And so that was helpful to kind of see him as a professional artist, to make a living at it and be like, okay, this is possible. And like, so someone I had a personal connection with to say, okay, this is possible. And then, so I worked for a while. I was doing more graphic design, doing more commercial art that way. And then really after just a couple years, I kind of got bored with sitting in front of the computer and wanted to just make with my hands and be more like analog with my work. So then just slowly started kind of shifting over into more fine art and kind of, I still do a little bit of graphic design, but because, as an artist, it's like you gotta take what you can get sometimes. It's been about a 15-year journey of shifting over from graphic design into more fine art.
Did you have any formal training whenever you were doing these different types of mediums?
So I went to a 2-year trade school for graphic design out in Long Beach, California, which is where I met my wife. So I went to school for 2 years for that. But for the painting, no formal training, just trying it. And my first artwork was I would take pictures of like storms and waves, and I would do this black and white photography, and then I would paint on top of it, like words and splatters and just weird stuff. And someone hired me to do a commissioned painting for their house, and it was like a big painting. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to paint this wave instead of just using a photograph. And then I realized, I was like, oh, I can actually paint this wave. So I painted a wave, and then the light bulb went off of like, okay, this is opening up new realms of, it's not just photos I have to take. I can actually paint. And so it was just kind of growing, as an artist and practicing. And I feel like my style kind of evolves the more I like, oh, let me try this. And then I try it. And then it my style goes that way for a little bit. yeah, it's just practicing and seeing if I could do it. And then once you figure out you can do it, you go follow that for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I really identify with a lot what you're saying. I'm a writer. I've been a journalist for 11 years
Yeah,
and
you understand it.
I understand it. However, I will say painting really intimidates me. I really love watercolor though, and I really appreciate painting. The reason why is because for writing, and I've mentioned this before, is it's different than speaking in the sense that you have a chance to edit. So I really appreciate that I can kind of word vomit on the page and go back and
Yeah.
fix it. And so with painting, I've realized that when I paint, I tend to put a lot of pressure on myself.
Yeah.
And if I mess up, I don't use the Bob Ross technique of, these are
Happy little accidents.
happy little accidents. I'm like, well, you just messed up the whole painting. So I'm wondering, because you mentioned practice, and I really, really appreciate that highlighting the fact that artists, it takes a lot of work and it's a different kind of work because you have to be self-disciplined. You have to have the willpower to show up for yourself every day. No one else is going to tell you what time to show up,
Yeah.
when to quit. You have to be mentally strong in those ways. So I was wondering, and maybe you're not as hard on yourself as I was whenever it came to painting, but
Yeah.
whenever maybe you do something that wasn't what you originally thought, is it a happy little accident for you? How do you keep going, I guess is the way. Like for writing, I have a delete button and I can re-edit the next day. So how do you keep going so you can find that vision that you originally had?
Well, the first thing that came to mind, but it was a joke. And I said a mortgage payment. That's the thing to keep. It's like I have
Right?
to finish this because this is my livelihood. So I have to finish. And I have this quote in my office that says, amateurs wait for inspiration, but professionals just show up and get the work. And I have to treat, as weird as it sounds, and I think as a working artist, because I consider writing an art, it's definitely a
Absolutely.
different style of art, but you have to have work ethic. And I think that pointing back to commercial fishing and, that kind of upbringing that I had, it was a very blue collar upbringing that I had. And so I look at it as my job. I get up in the morning and I have my morning routine and then I go to work at 8 o'clock and I work until 4. And so you just have to make it work. And if I sat around and waited for inspiration, it would just never happen. And I think with anything, I think with writing as well, once you start, it kind of the inspiration comes and you kind of work through it. And with any painting, there's I call it like the awkward teenager years where it's like, you're like, this is really bad and ugly and then it eventually grows up. So it's just a matter, I think, of years of doing it. It's going to get better. But I think you still have that doubt where it's like, I'll get like 10 hours into a painting and be like, I should just give up. I should just give up. I'm going to go get a job at a restaurant and I'm the worst painter in the world. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to keep going because I have to finish. And then you finish. And then you're like, oh, this actually turned out pretty good.
Yeah.
So
I
every
love
painting
it.
goes through that. But there is that sense of like, okay, I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. I can just kind of push through. And I mean, I've probably painted 100. I mean, it's got to be 500 like storm paintings of like stormy seas or stormy clouds. It's what I love to paint. And every morning I get up and I paint like a practice stormy sea. But I still will like, oh my gosh, I can't figure out this lighting and how is this spray gonna go? But you just push through. So sorry, I'm rambling.
No, that is so good. I want to keep rambling with you. That's like, I totally identify with that. I know a lot of people who are creative definitely identify with that. It's so comforting to hear about another artist's struggle because you're like, oh, okay, I'm not alone. Because there are those moments of going, what the hell am I thinking? Like, what is going on right here? And I love the quote that you have on your office because that's how in journalism, it's like you don't have time for writer's block. You have a deadline and you need to
Yeah,
get that out.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
writer's block does not exist. So you have to force yourself to work through it and get through those awkward teenage years and be like, oh, yeah, okay, I did it. Cool.
Yeah,
All right. I still have faith.
yeah.
That's so great. And I wanted to mention, so the stormy seas, let's dig in. Why do you love the stormy seas? What about that brings you life?
Okay. That's a good, deep question. Again, I'll try to answer with brevity and accuracy. A couple of things. So I was working for a while when I was a graphic designer. This was about 16 years ago. And I used to do in-water photography for a wetsuit company. And so I would swim out and take pictures of the surfers while they were surfing. But because it was a wetsuit company, the colder the water, the better, because you're selling the wetsuit. And I was, it was a February up in North Jersey, and I swam out to take some pictures and I got caught in a rip current. And, it was a classic, like your mind knows what you're supposed to do in a rip current, but you're like, the beach is there. It's like 6 feet away, 8 feet away. I can get it. My feet could kind of touch. And I was like, I'm just going to muscle through. And I eventually ended up passing out and blacking out and then waking up on the beach and kind of having this near death experience and realizing there's a whole other thing involved in that. But it was like kind of having this reassessment of my life. And this was like kind of the kicker to be like, I want to be a professional artist because I don't want to be doing graphic design. Just like, I want to follow my passions and do this and take that jump. And it was like kind of pivotal in that. And I think the storm in that, it's almost like this something happened in my brain where I have to paint it over and over again, like facing it, kind of facing that moment. And it's just become this obsession to paint that over and over again. And what I've learned, and I think we all understand, is that the hard times, the trials, that moment, that 10 minutes of my life was so life changing. And that those hard times, those, metaphorically, those storms in life are what form us. They're what makes us better. It's what changes us. And so it's just a metaphor of painting that hard time and allowing people to face that, allowing people to remember that. And on a surface level, I think we look at art on a surface level and an internal level. On a surface level, speaking of commercial fishing and the kind of lifestyle that surrounds that, those storms there are stories that can be told. And, I feel like a lot of fishermen, they see my work and they can like remember a story of seeing that. So there's a little bit of nostalgia and maybe bravado to that of like, yes, I've lived through that. But then on an internal level, or maybe a spiritual or, philosophical level of remembering those hard times that you've survived through. And it's like, I've been through this hard time. And I think that's where my work talks to people who aren't connected to the ocean, just in general, of we've all been through hard times and we have to like not just shun them, but we remember them and realize that's a part of the process of refining us.
Wow.
That was the short version, I think.
God, that was so beautiful. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. That hits on so many levels. And I can't wait for people to see your art if they haven't seen it already. What an incredible background of that. So, wow. I'm like, interview over. We're good. No, I'm kidding. It's just so great. Okay. So that is, where do we go from here? I mean, that was like, we just heard David's heart and soul and your rebirth story. You're essentially painting your rebirth, your baptism, rebirth, all things. Wow. Yeah. And so when you wake up and you paint the storms and you say you wake up, you have work 8 to 4 or something like that, right?
That's approximately it. Typically my work day is I get up about 5 and I try to read my Bible for an hour and journal. That's very important to me to just be able to like set my mind right and think about godly things and spiritual things in the morning. And so I do that, have breakfast, and then 6 to 8 is when my kids are getting up and going to school. So working from home and being self-employed, that's a blessing to be a part of that. I try not to work through that because it'd be easy just to like stay in my studio. So 6 to 8 is getting the boys ready. My youngest gets on the bus at 8. So then it's like, then I come home. And so my wife does all my business dealings. So we usually will have a meeting in the morning of just kind of like, hey, what do we got to do? What's going on for today? Things like this that I would just ignore and not do and be a flaky artist. She makes sure that like, okay, you have this at 10, you have this at 1, this is what you got to do. And yeah, so we kind of plan that and then then start painting. And I try to do theoretically, I mean, it's really probably 2 or 3 times a week, but I try to draw and sketch every morning just for like an hour just to practice and for no purpose other than practice.
Wow. And so it's like, going to work out, you're keeping your muscle strength.
Yeah. And typically, I think that was the sketch I did of your husband is what that was. I was like, oh, I want to try something different. I want to try a couple more. I want to get a little bit more into figurative work and paint people and stuff like that. So that was kind of where that came from of like just scrolling Instagram and be like, oh, this is a cool picture. I'm just going to paint this. And it turned out really good. So I posted it.
Yeah, it did.
Most of the sketches don't get posted because, again, like as an artist, as a content creator, it's like there has to be something that's just for me and just for my own practice. Not everything has to be shared. But every once in a while, when something turns out good, you're like, I got to share it.
Yeah, I love that. That's reminds me of, because I'm like, oh, what does he do with his sketches? And I'm like, well, I have a closet full of journals that are
Yeah.
just for me. And it's the same
Yeah.
thing. It's
It's
like
a sketchbook.
writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Do your kids have any interest in art?
My oldest is very creative. His mind is more three-dimensional. He does a lot of sculpting but he likes developing games. So he makes like card games and board games and just that's his thing. He just makes games up. And he always has like scraps of paper and little coins and he's like putting them together and so that's his thing. And then my youngest is all about sports. So,
Nice. It's a good
yeah.
balance.
Yeah.
And your
It
wife is Melissa, correct?
is. Yeah.
Please tell her thank you for just
I tell
communicating
her
with
thank you
me.
every day.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's beautiful. What a great relationship. I mean, it is nice to know about how you guys work together, not only as a team for being parents and partners in life, but you're also able to work together professionally, which is huge. And I think that's another huge thing that partners of commercial fishermen do often and maybe don't realize it until they start, until they fall in love with their fishermen and they realize, oh, I'm helping them professionally, whether it's painting buoys, tying gear, cutting
Yeah.
bait, bookkeeping, all these things. So
Yeah.
it really is such a beautiful balance when a couple can not only work together as partners in life, but also professionally. It takes a whole other
Yeah.
type of skill that you need to, and respect, honestly, a whole other
Yeah.
level of respect for each other. I don't know if this is too intimate to ask, but I really would love to know about your religious and spiritual life. And I really love that you talked about how you wake up and you read the Bible every day, and wanted to know if when that became more of a permanent practice for you and if that's something that you grew up with.
Yeah. I grew up in a Christian home and it's really been a part of my life all growing up. I think the practice of reading every day has really been probably in the last 10 years, I think, of just studying and reading. And, it's like if you want to be, I consider myself a follower of Jesus. So if anything you want to follow, you want to read and know more about. So it's just trying to learn and read more about Jesus and who he is. And so that's been a big part of my life. And the journaling, I think, is a big part of that. And you know this as someone who journals, it's like whenever you can write, you like really something about writing, it like forces you, maybe because you slow down, like you really get deeper in your thought. My journal is almost, I look at it as like praying, so instead of just like folding my hands and closing my eyes and praying, it's like I'm kind of journaling and it's almost that journaling is an act of prayer of like, what's stressing me out? What am I nervous about? What am I scared about? Those things, I kind of write that out. And then it's like that opportunity to give that to God as a prayer. And then it's like the journal shut and it's like, okay, I can start my day. God's got that. I've given it to him. Things are out of my control. So I'm just going to do what I can do right now. So those big things of bills or sickness or anything like that we can't control, that's in the journal. It's in a prayer. There we go. All I can control is how I present myself in this interview, how I present myself to my wife, how I present myself. Like that's what I can control. So that the journaling is really helpful to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so beautiful. It's really lovely because, yeah, everybody has different ideas about being connected and feeling grounded, and whether that's religiously, spiritually, believing in yourself, believing in, believing in your partner's ability that they will be safe on the water, believing in their skill. But I appreciate that. And then on a side note, when you read the Bible, how do you read it? Do you have like a workbook? Do you read it from cover to cover? Do you just pick it up and then that's what you're focusing on that day?
No. So I typically will read a book from the New Testament. So like post Jesus. And then I'll study that. That may take a couple weeks. And then I'll read a book from the Old Testament, study that. Those typically take longer because they're bigger. And then I try to read a psalm, which is like the poetry of the Bible. And they're a little shorter. I try to read a psalm every day. And then a chapter of Proverbs because there's 31 Proverbs. So it kind of works out every day. Like today, read Proverbs 23. So it's kind of like reading the Old Testament and the New Testament kind of keeps me grounded in like the overarching story of the Bible. And then the Psalms, to me, because it's like poetry, it's just like beautiful to read. Like when David wrote them, they were like, it was poetry. It's just pretty to read it and to kind of hear someone beautifully share their heart is encouraging. And a lot of them are like, God, why did you leave me? And why do I feel like my enemies are coming to kill me? Like this guy's raw, like laying it out. So it's good for me because like sometimes I feel that way. And you're like, okay, I'm not alone. And the Proverbs are just good bits of wisdom, have good friends and be honest with your business dealings and don't lie and things like that. So,
Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, we're going to keep going. I'd love to know what are some of your biggest influences? Maybe they're different artists, or obviously we know the stormy sea and
yeah.
your rebirth, but what are some of your biggest influences when it comes to your art?
So creatively, I think painters, there was it's like 1950s in that pop art expressionist movement was Cy Twombly. He's just like really loose and he does these big gestures. I just always really enjoyed him. And I think he has a permanent installation at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So I've seen it two or three times. So I think that really is helpful because you're like, I've seen these paintings. So they're like really cool. And I just dig his style. I like, the looseness of it. I think Arthur Streeton is an Australian impressionist. He was from, I think, like the maybe late 1800s, early 1900s, but there was this whole movement that happened in Australia with these impressionists that I feel like is where, for lack of better words, I steal from the most. I just really like the real loose, brush strokes and you see it and it's blurry, but it gives you the image and the feeling. And so I really like Arthur Street and I think he's really cool. A lot of like muted colors and so, but yeah, I think those are the two painters that I really enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. That's cool. Now I have to go look them up because I've not heard of them. Maybe I've seen their
Yeah.
paintings though, but I have
Yeah.
not.
And I mean, I like Jackson Pollock. I like Andy Warhol. Those are like, the popular ones that a lot of people know. But I think from artists that I steal from the most are probably those guys.
Love it. I'm going to put a side by side. I'm going to Google it and look at your
Yeah,
in
if
your
you look at Arthur
Instagram.
Street, and I mean, he does some like seascapes, like beach stuff, but there's definitely like these loose. If you really want to do side by side, Montauk Dawson, that's a big one. I steal a lot from him.
I love that you say that. I mean, art is to be influenced by other art. It's like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying it in jest. I don't really
yeah,
steal.
yeah.
Where I see the ideas and I'm like, oh, I love what they're doing there, and I'm gonna try that. You make it your own. You take those three influences, and then it becomes David Macomber.
Yeah, I love it. That's so great. And so, what do you hope that people gain from your paintings?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of said that before of just I want people not to be intimidated. Sometimes people see my work and they like, oh, that's just scary. I don't want to think of the ocean like that because people like sometimes they think they just want to think of like chilling on the beach and I don't want to think of the ocean that way. And but I want that. I want that intimidation that and like that is scary. But if you notice, I attempt to, in all my paintings, there's always a hint of horizon, a hint of like sun beaming through. It's never completely dark. There's always this little bit of hope on the other side. And I think it's just remembering to use my vocabulary is to remembering what God has brought you through, how that's refined you and made you a better person. That would be the biggest thing is just like don't forget those hard times and don't be afraid of those hard times. And I think sometimes partners of commercial fishing, I've had people who their spouses are commercial fishermen and they're like, I don't want to think about that as like where my husband is or whatever. But it's like there's something in that fear or that's what's refining us and it's making us better. And so it's definitely hopeful. I want my paintings to be hopeful. And even though they look scary and they're intimidating, I want them to be hopeful.
Love it. Do you have any exhibitions or any upcoming projects that you'd like to share?
I've been working on this idea for a couple years now. I want to build these sculptures. This might be really boring for your listeners, so I apologize. I'll try to make this brief.
No, bring it on.
I
Bring it on.
want
We
to
want
build
this.
these. I built a sculpture that is this mechanical sculpture is like a wind vane, and then it draws based on how the direction of the wind and how the wind is going. And it kind of is like this wind powered drawing machine. It's the best way I could describe it. And I'm like getting really close. So I built one a couple years ago and I've been like slowly, because it's like kind of a back burner project, and I'm really close to having it finished and refined. And I want to do an exhibition next spring where I take this machine and I go to different places. So maybe it's on a boat, or maybe it's on the ferry, or it's at a particular dock, and or maybe it's at just at like I'm just thinking of like areas around my town. It's at the lighthouse. And like these paintings or these drawings are being visual representations of what the wind is doing at these particular spots. But I want to have the show, and I want to do it on. So we have this like whale watcher boat in our town that a friend of mine owns, and I want to do it on her boat and then have the machine there drawing while we're on the boat. So like recording the wind. So that's like a forward dream of really close to like pulling the trigger and being able to announce that. But so stay tuned, because that's
Woo!
where we're heading. But besides that, just continuing to work on, I have getting to be Christmas, so I do a lot of commissions for that time. So that's kind of the big thing. But for shows, I have a group show coming up in May 21st of next year. That's a group show here locally in Cape May. But besides that, I don't think so. It's just finishing up this wind sculpture idea, because I'm really excited about it.
That's amazing. I'm excited to stay tuned for that. That's really
great. And it's just the whole different direction of where my work is going, but just taking this inspiration of the ocean, the wind, the waves, all of that, and then being like, okay, how do I, instead of just drawing that or painting that, how do I like join with it and partner with it and really have it be a part of the work, not just representation of the work?
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And so poignant, time and place. That is what it represents, that exact perfect.
Yeah.
And also kind of the letting go and letting Mother Nature, the elements, do its thing and going with that. I love it. It's really beautiful. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. How can people connect with you and your art?
So the best way would just be davidmacomber.com. I don't know if you want to put a link, but it's David Macomber, Macomber. And then on Instagram, it's David Macomber Art. And follow along. Perfect. I'm pretty active on Instagram. I try to post every couple of days. That's the best way.
I love it. I'm definitely putting it in the show notes. Wanted to know, commission-wise, how do people get in contact with you for that? Do they email you on either medium and then
message on either way.
Okay.
My wife will follow up, because I would just ignore it and be like, oh, I'll get to that later. And then a year will go by. She follows up with that. And we have like a questionnaire that people can fill out of like, kind of what you're looking for and your budget and all that kind of stuff. And so, but do commissions of a lot of commissions are boats. A lot of people want to get their boats. And I think where I differ from a lot of artists is I like to paint the boats in the stormy seas, and I don't like painting boats at docks. So I think there's probably like an embroidered pillow quote there somewhere of ships aren't meant to be at dock or something like that. But
no, I was about to say it. It's ships are safe in the harbor, but that's not what they're built for.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Something like that.
I was literally thinking that quote.
Yeah. So I try to do paintings of boats working and doing what they're supposed to do.
Awesome. Is there anything you'd like to add? This has been such a informative.
No, this is great. And I love what you're doing. And now that I'm following you on Instagram and watching along, and I think of my mom, and I think of growing up and just the sacrifices that she made and the sacrifices we made as a family. And then I see, my cousin's kids and wife doing, and it's a whole different lifestyle that people, unless you were like, worked on an oil rig or were in the military or something like that, it's like, it's just different, and I like what you're doing, and you're trying to help people have some hope and community. Like, we're in this together. And, I think that is, COVID taught us anything, it's the importance of community, that we don't do well separated. So you're building this community to help people. And I think that's great. And I just want to encourage all the listeners and watchers that, there are people around you that want to help you and are in it with you, and let's help each other out.
Thank you so much for those kind words. We appreciate that. I appreciate that. And it's been such a pleasure to have you on today. I love that we got to talk about your background, your art, religion and spirituality. We went deep. I mean, this is what it's all about. That's what art is. It brings your insides out. And so I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that with us and giving us your all. So thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. To support our community, I'd so appreciate it if you'd tap the subscribe button to this podcast or write a review. And if you're a POCF who wants to connect further, go to POCFpride.com for weekly vlogs and to learn about opportunities to join our private communities. We'd love to have you.